Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about James Morrow's novel, The Asylum of Dr. Caligari, which is, as the name might suggest, a very loose adaptation of Robert Wiener's film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, one of the greatest examples of German expressionist cinema ever, and just an amazing movie, full stop. Morrow's novel has very, very little in common with Wiener's film, apart from having a character named Caligari, Alessandro Caligari in this case, who is the head of a mental institution with his own unique system of psychological treatment. And he's interested in mesmerism. But Morrow's Caligari isn't really so much a mesmerist as he is a sorcerer. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Wiener's Caligari, for as much as he exists in this German expressionist world of sort of madness and oppression and the sort of subterranean realm of dreams, he uses psychology. He uses mesmerism, hypnotism. Basically, he's not a magician. He doesn't do supernatural feats. He just pushes the bounds of what's possible with hypnotism as a psychotherapeutic practice. Morrow's Caligari is a magician. He uses straight up magic, like he's putting lizards and shit in potions to make magic happen. So there's a huge difference there. This novel is basically about the adventures of Francis Wyndham and Ilona Wessels. Francis is a young American who is inspired by modern art, the modern art of the sort of immediate early World War I period, so around 1914-ish, 1913. He's inspired by this art. He wants to become an artist, so he moves to Paris, finds out that none of the great artists want him as an apprentice, but because he meets this one artist who's like, hey, I'm getting called up to serve in the military. I was going to take this job as an art therapy teacher at Caligari's Asylum in this small neutral country named, let me look it up because it's not a real country and I forget what the proper name is, Wiesenstadt. So basically, Francis takes this job. This guy writes him a letter of introduction. Francis goes and he becomes the art therapy teacher at Caligari's mental institution. Caligari explains his psychological practice, and I actually think it's not an uninteresting system. It's a compelling idea. I don't know that it works psychologically as treatment, but it's an interesting idea. So what he says here, he hates Freud. He detests Freud and Freud's psychoanalytic methodology. So what Caligari says is the future of psychiatry belongs to hypnotism, not to some Byzantine theory of sublimated fucking. And then Francis says, and the future of hypnotism belongs to you, signore? Precisely, said Caligari, still beaming, and to the brave new world of heteropathic medicine. Francis says, I've heard of homeopathic medicine. Caligari says, treating a disease by aping its symptoms instead of attacking the cause. Homeopathy has everything going for it except validity and results, which is kind of an amazing critique. And then Francis says, rather like Freud's system. Caligari says, how pleased I am that Monsieur Doraine couldn't accept the position. That was the artist who was originally hired to the job and then who sent Francis in his place. Francis asks, and heteropathy? Caligari explains, we charm the patient into embracing a self-image compatible with the behavior that brought him here. Or incompatible, with the behavior that brought him here. Does he suffer from a split personality? then convince him through drugs and hypnotism that he is the god of the Jews, that is the most monolithic entity imaginable. So basically, the idea of heteropathic medicine in Caligari's system is whatever the particular problem is, you inundate the psyche with the opposite. And then in an attempt to reconcile these two competing extremes, the mind will sort of snap back into the center and become healthy. That's an interesting idea. Seems to have nothing actually to do with the practice that Caligari implements at his asylum. This never ever comes up again. We never see this happening in the treatment of any of the patients that we actually meet in the novel. It doesn't even occur with the main thing that Caligari is doing, really. Neither hypnotism nor heteropathic medicine ever really shows up again. So, Francis is working in this asylum. Ilona is one of his patients, whom he starts a sexual relationship with, which is not good psychiatric practice or good teaching practice, parenthetically, but nonetheless. And at some point, Caligari is like, hey, Francis, I think it would be psychologically helpful to Ilona if you started having sex with her. So how about doing that? Which is an incredibly bad prescription, incredibly unethical. But it gets around the problem that Francis and Ilona have been having just marathon sex sessions. And, people would notice that kind of thing, particularly the nurses specifically assigned to help Ilona with stuff. So that seems convenient, if rather arbitrary, within the novel. But what they find out is that, so Caligari was making this painting. Called, let me find the name of it. I can't remember the exact name of it off the top of my head. Ecstatic Wisdom. And he wouldn't let Francis or anybody else see the painting. Francis eventually sneaks down to Caligari's sort of subterranean lab while he's working on the painting. And again, it's this weird, like, medieval sorcerer witch bullshit where he's like putting in yellow and putting a frog and like doing incantations and shit. And what we find out, this is an enchanted. Francis and Ilona sneak into the gallery at night and at it. Basically, is soldiers and the sort of come in and magically fill viewer, at least the male viewer, with Kriegslust, the love or the love of violence. Apparently, the antidote to Kriegslust is fucking, because Ilona is like, we can't give in to desire to just fight. We've got to have sex. That's the way to do it. It's right. Don't know what, don't know how, but that's what it is. So, Gari's plan basically is that he's going to basically a sort of almost a amusement ride type, where basically groups of soldiers march through the gallery past system, get all up for violence at the front and kill each other. And he brings soldiers from all different countries. In Wiesenstein, neutral nation in this, he's got German soldiers, he's got British soldiers, Russian soldiers, Turkish soldiers, all of the major powers and their soldiers there to fucking jazzed up on killing the enemy, which leads to horrific violence. But it's also World War I, so horrific violence is the order of the day. But Caligari is making a massive amount of money off of this. Francis, Ilona, and a small group of sort of gallant comrades decide that they need to put a stop to this. And they find out that Ilona is also a magical painter by chance and convenience. That she paints these spider webs because her delusion is that she is the queen of the spider world or something. And on the spider webs that she paints, the spiders can move. So they basically do a complete full-scale recreation of ecstatic wisdom, but over it, they paint on sort of very thin gauze type sheets a painting called Totentons, which is basically an anti-war painting about the horrors of World War I. And that sort of magically grafts itself on top of the fake version of ecstatic wisdom, and then they then manage to sneak that into the gallery, getting rid of the original version of ecstatic wisdom by just putting it downstairs in Caligari's lab, where he apparently doesn't notice it for months. And so what happens is, as the soldiers march through the gallery, they're filled with Lebenslust, the love for life. They become pacifists. They refuse to fight. They desert en masse, etc., etc. And it takes Caligari months to realize that anything has gone wrong, even though there's suddenly mass desertions in units who had specifically come to see his painting. When he realizes there's something wrong, he locks up the 4 people in the asylum who are most sort of responsible for this. He burns Totentons, the anti-war painting, with a magical flamethrower, because it's magical painting, can't destroy it with regular fire, gotta have magical fire. But the central figure of Totentons, Johannes Jedermann, basically John Everyman, steps from the painting, because apparently that's a thing that happens. He becomes a paint person, basically, but out in the real world. He disarms Caligari, takes the flamethrower off him, frees the anti-war conspirators, and then takes them through his burning painting, which is also apparently a portal, and it takes them to the front, the Western Front, that is, where they hook up with a dude who's like, hey, you fucking love that anti-war painting. You've changed my life. Me and my men will be in your service, but also they're going to go off to the Black Forest because that's where peace is. So then he's like, just so happens my estranged cousin whom I hate is in charge of Germany's new experimental tank. I'll just, ask him to give us one so we can attack Caligari's asylum, and we'll use his magical flamethrower to burn ecstatic wisdom. Nothing can go wrong. And that's basically what they do, long story short. There's some complications involved, but that's basically the plan and basically what happens. At which point, during the attack, after he has successfully burned ecstatic wisdom, Francis gets shot in the head, whereupon he dies. Ilona gets shot in the stomach, but she lives long enough to paint a magical portrait of Francis that then comes to life, paints a magical portrait of her. So she is back to life, but they're both canvas people, which means they have a limited lifespan. So they end up at the end of the book, basically just sort of walking into their paintings and then coming together in paint world on the other side and just hanging out forever. So, it's not a bad novel in itself. For what it is, it's actually a good story. It's an interesting read. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in terms of questions about the influence of modern art, the influence of media on psychology, how we are trained by media to be supportive of military violence, things like this. You think about something like manufactured consent. What's his name? Why can't I think of his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. You think about a concept like manufactured consent, right? This idea that when the media sort of drums into us that particular horrific violence or torture or military activity is justified, then, and is actually good in some cases, then we come to accept and support those things despite their horrific consequences. Noam Chomsky, sorry. So there's some degree of those kinds of questions here, but the thing that bothers me about it, and this is in part, I think, shaped by the fact that I read this novel as part of research about adaptations of Vina's film, one adaptation in particular, but providing a larger context by looking at other adaptations of Robert Vina's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I have two big problems with this. One is that there's a bunch of stuff that I just don't see as being practical. Like, the idea that this group of people could paint an exact replica of a giant painting, and we're talking like giant here, and sneak it through an insane asylum without getting caught, I have a big problem with that. The other element I have less of a problem with, the magical realism element, where they're just like, oh yeah, Caligari is a sorcerer. Guess that makes sense. No need to worry about that. Oh, fucking Johannes Jedermann just stepped out of this painting. He's a real boy now. Also, this painting can transport us to the Western Front. That makes perfect sense. No need to question any of those things. Why even be concerned? So to the extent that this is within sort of the realm of magical realism, that's fine. That is what it is. Magical realism uses that kind of trope where the supernatural is presented as part of the everyday. But there's so much stuff that I think could have made this more interesting. And ultimately, I think that's kind of my issue with it, is compared to what I was hoping for, it's boring. Caligari is just a war profiteer at the end of the day. His hypnotism, his heteropathic medicine, which are really interesting ideas, don't really come up. They aren't actually central to what the book is even about. They serve no real purpose. What I was kind of hoping actually was that in some way, in some twisted sense, Caligari was like, yeah, my goal actually is peace. I want to stop the fighting, and the way that I'm trying to do that is by making it so horrific and making people so filled with bloodlust that society as such is like, whoa, let's fucking pump the brakes here. No, we don't get that. We don't get that element at all. It's simply, I, Caligari, want to make money to keep the asylum open, and I'm going to do that by filling people with bloodlust so that they go out and kill more people on the Western Front. But even that I have a problem with, because why? If you're a sorcerer, if you can just fucking do magic and shit, why not just magic yourself up some gold? Why not just magic yourself up keeping the asylum intact? Why kill a bunch of people? The motivation doesn't make that much sense to me, and it's inconsistent with what we get about him in the beginning. This idea of, I'm a doctor, I'm trying to heal people's psyches. It doesn't make that much sense to me. So I think that's a big problem. I don't know. I feel like there was a number of different directions this could have gone that would have really challenged my sort of expectations. But in the end, it's kind of a simple good guys and bad guys story. And even the elements that try and problematize the good guys. Sure, Francis is having sex with Ilona while he's her teacher and theoretically part of the therapy process. That's a problem, but it's not really treated as a problem. It's treated as a problem to the extent that they want to not get caught, but not necessarily, there's not much time spent on, oh, this is actually a bad thing. We really should not be doing this, but we can't help ourselves. And then it gets the blessing of Caligari. Like, they're literally told to bone one another. So that problem just totally disappears. And then there is this one bit where Ilona raises this question. She says, by shaping the souls of unsuspecting schoolboys, are we not indulging in a species of hubris as monstrous as Caligari's? And sure, I can see an argument for that. At the same time, there is a substantive difference between I'm going to brainwash people into wanting to kill versus I'm going to brainwash people into wanting to not kill. I think that distinction does matter. There's also a question, and you also get into the question of if it is purely a question of influencing the mind of someone else, people's minds are influenced all the time. Ilona herself went to a psychiatric facility to have her mind influenced. That was the goal. That was the objective of the treatment. World War I had a thriving propaganda industry, encouraging young men to want to go out and kill the enemy. That was also influencing their minds. And so you've got that element where the conception of guilt, the conceptualization of guilt is not that thoroughly developed. But there's also the fact that this is the only time that ever gets mentioned. It is this passing throwaway thing. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more room for complexity than we actually get in the novel. And so I was somewhat disappointed with it. Again, part of that may be my sort of desire for the novel to have done things that it didn't do. But all of the things that I wanted this book to have done are rooted in elements that are already there. So I don't feel like that's a super unfair critique.